I'm Dr. Pete Jones from Shire Professional Chartered Psychologists. I'm the research director for the company, and I spend most of my time developing unconscious bias tests, delivering unconscious bias workshops, and also carrying out research and consultancy around unconscious bias. The purpose of this video is to give you a basic introduction to the underpinning theory behind unconscious bias and how it impacts our behaviour. I'd like to set the tone of this video. This is a quote from Professor Trish Devine at Wisconsin University in America. She's a professor of prejudice at the university, and she says, "There are no bad people, just bad thinking habits." I think she's wrong. I've met some bad people, I'm sure you've met some bad people, but the majority of people who come to work to do a good job and to make the best decisions that they can. They don't come to work to make bad decisions or to be malicious. But this notion of unconscious bias causes us to make decisions which are not always optimal. Unconscious bias is a thinking habit we've learned and which we can unlearn. And certainly the research says that we can unpick the effects of unconscious bias. And finally, the only shame in having a bias is in not wanting to better manage it for the sake of our colleagues and our customers. Okay, to start this session then, I'd like you to do some maths. I know you like maths at this time of day. So what I want you to do, I'm about to put on screen a mathematical conundrum. If you've seen this before, don't worry too much. And if you're watching it with other people, don't spoil it for them. All you need to do is to quickly calculate in your head the result of this mathematical problem and as quickly as you can call out the answer. Okay, so here's the problem. A bat and a ball cost £1.10. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. So how much does the ball cost? Calculate the answer as quickly as you can. Okay, time's up. What have you got? 80% of people who see that problem say that the answer is 10p. We do a quick bit of maths. We take the pound off the pound and 10p and we come up with a 10p answer. But it can't possibly be 10p. If it were 10p and the bat is £1 more than the ball, that would mean that the bat and the ball together cost £1.20. Have another think. Okay, time's up. What have you got? If you've got 10p still, that's not a surprise. What the research tells us is that once we get that 10p answer in our head, we find it very difficult to dislodge it, even though the answer is not 10p. The answer is actually 5p. If you do the maths again, so the ball is 5p, the bat costs £1 more than the ball, that means that the bat is £1 and 5p, add the two together and they come to £1.10p. There is no other correct answer. You may have seen that slide before and that problem before. It comes from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by the psychologist Daniel Kahneman. Daniel's a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for Economics a few years ago for applying what psychologists have known for a while about how the brain works to how people think about money and how people think about number. What Daniel's actually trying to illustrate in this is that the brain has two simultaneous operating systems for processing information, the conscious and the unconscious. The conscious is the little voice in your head that narrates your life. So the conscious is thinking, I should have booked the dog in for the vets, I must pick some milk upon the way home tonight, I must remember to send that email. It continually narrates the activities of your life and it has particular features. So, more maths. I promise this is the last maths of this session. What I want you to do is I want to calculate in your head the following mathematical problem. I want you to multiply 42 times 17 in your head as quickly as you can. Got an answer? The answer is 714. But the actual fact, it's the process through which you go, because three things tend to happen when we calculate 42 times 17 that expose the workings of the conscious. The first one is this. Were you taken back to Mrs. Parker's maths class in 1977 or 1987, wherever it was you went to school? Mrs. Parker taught me that the way I do those kind of big mathematical problems is I put one number over another number, I multiply the first digit by the second digit, I add a zero, I carry the tens across. It matters not how you were taught to do those kind of problems. The key feature here is that the conscious is rule driven. It gets out rules from previously learned in situations and it applies them to try and solve new and novel situations. The second feature of the conscious is the speed of operation. It's fairly slow and clunky. People typically take about 5 or 10 seconds to get the bat and the ball problem wrong. The 42 times 17 problem takes them a little bit longer. It's slow and clunky in its operation. The third feature of the conscious is the critical one. When you were calculating 42 times 17, did you notice that something happened? Everything comes to a grinding halt. Any fidgeting stops, any smiling stops, any drinking and sipping of water stops. Everything comes to a grinding halt. And the reason for that is really, really simple. The conscious has got limits on its processing power. It can only process about 40 bits of information in one moment in time. And when it reaches that limit, it stops. And 42 times 17 is about that limit. If you ask people to calculate 42 times 17 when they're walking along a street, they often have to stop. They can't even swing their arms and legs in unison when they're trying to calculate 42 times 17. And that's because of this limit on the processing power of the conscious. So, I'll give you a picture in your head, if I may, of what the limited processing power of the conscious looks like as a 40mm table tennis ball, a ping pong ball. That's all the conscious has got. And 42 times 17 eats it all up. We've got nothing left. So that's the conscious, rule-driven, slow in operation and limited in resources. But we're impressed by the conscious because it does the day job. Problem solving, decision making and planning all take place in tiny slithers of 40 bits after 40 bits after 40 bits. But now let's talk about the unconscious, because the unconscious is the complete opposite. For a start off, it does not have that limitation on its processing powers. It can process 200,000 times as much information as the conscious in any one moment, 11 million bits compared to the 40 bits processed by the conscious. It has got colossal processing power. If it were a ping pong ball, it would be 2.4 meters across in comparison to the processing power of the conscious. So the second feature we talked about earlier was the speed of operation. Remember, the conscious was slow and clunky. The unconscious is fast, incredibly fast. This is how fast it is. If I slide you into an fMRI brain scanner and I flash on a computer screen in front of you a photograph of somebody who does not look like you, so they've got a different ethnic origin, they've got a different gender, it even works for sexual orientation, and I take that picture off the computer screen in front of you so fast that if I ask you what you saw, people normally say nothing. It takes the eyes around about 300 milliseconds to process an image through the optical nerve and for the brain to make sense of it. So if I take that image off the computer screen at say 200 milliseconds before that threshold is reached and ask you what you saw, people will normally say they saw nothing. They saw a flash of light, there may have been something there, but they can't say what it is. If we look at your fMRI brain scan at that moment, what we see is this. Somewhere between 30 and 100 milliseconds, so somewhere between 3 and 10 times faster than your eyes can even process the image, the unconscious has got it. We see an activation in a very ancient part of our brain called the amygdala. We often used to talk about that as the fight or flight response, but it's actually, in fact, it's part of our old reptilian brain. The fight or flight response was seen in the amygdala of the brain somewhere between 30 and 100 milliseconds, only for faces that don't look like ours. The unconscious is already sending messages across the brain, both chemically and electrically, for that to become our decision and for that to become our behaviour. By the time the conscious finally kicks in at around 400 milliseconds, it's too late. The unconscious could have made that decision a dozen or 15 times over in the time that your eyes were simply processing and making sense of the image. It is remarkably fast. But it's the final feature of the unconscious that's critical. It is not rule driven by like the conscious, it's driven by intuition. And it's the process by which we acquire, maintain and use intuition in our decision making that causes our implicit biases to impinge on our decision making. So let me tell you how this works then. So let me give you a little bit of a story that goes with it. On a daily basis, I go into reception areas in large companies around the world. And when I walk into the reception area, my conscious is busy. It's thinking, what was the name of the person I was supposed to be asking for? Did they say I could go straight up to the training room, or should I actually wait for them in reception? Have I got my case studies with me? Have I got my test results? I must book the dog in for the vets later on today. All of that is the conscious at work. So the conscious is now busy. It can only do 42 times 17, and I've given it 5 or 6 jobs now to think about. The unconscious, on the other hand, in reception is doing one job and one job only, and that is looking for patterns. It is a miraculous pattern matching machine. So let me tell you about a pattern that I've seen in the reception areas of many, many businesses that I go into, and it might be the same in yours. There is one characteristic that the receptionists in most businesses have in common. What do you think it is? I think you'd probably wager next month's wages on this being the answer. Most of the receptionists I meet are women. So let me tell you how my brain deals neurologically with that pattern. You'll hear the neuroscientists talk about something called Fi-Wi or Wi-Fi. They have an expression, what the brain fires together, the brain wires together. So this is based upon, for the biologist amongst you, Hebbian theory, and it goes like this. When I encounter a woman receptionist, the neurons in my brain that have been clustered together to represent woman fire at the same time as the neurons that have been formulated together in my brain to represent receptionists. So when I meet a woman receptionist, they fire at the same time. The brain is a fundamentally lazy thing. We talk about the miserly brain. It does not want to have to do 2 processes if it can do 1. Therefore, once that pattern of woman receptionist is established, the brain starts to activate those neurons at the same time. It starts to connect them together such that when I meet a woman, I make the connection to all of the patterns of jobs I've seen them into before. When I meet a receptionist, I automatically, in that sub 100 millisecond space, activate the neural pathways for woman. And that starts to impinge on our decision making. We start to make all of the routine decisions we need to make about people in that sub 100 millisecond space. In developing intuition and in developing those neural pathways, the unconscious uses a process called social categorization. It pigeonholes people. It says, I think I know a little bit of people who wear blue shirts, people who wear the shoes that you wear, people who went to the school that you went to, that sound like you sound, the people who have the skin tone that you've got. It thinks it knows a little bit about you, and it starts to rapidly sort you into these boxes, these categories, these pigeonholes. So far, so good. I can now get through my life, because if I tried to use the conscious, the little ping pong ball, for making judgments about people, I would quickly have a problem. The very first person I met who'd got a blue shirt, I'd be making decisions about the tone of blue shirt, the collar, the way that it was worn. It's already brought my little ping pong ball, my conscious brain, to a grinding halt. It can only do 42 times 17, and I'm now asking it to make numerous judgments about the colour of somebody's shirt. And I've not just got to do the shirt. I've got to do the accent, the skin tone, the haircut, the shoes. And I'm not just going to do that person. I've got to make predictions about every single person I meet. The conscious can't do that. It is far, far too small in its processing power. It is far too slow, and the learned rules it's got simply don't work all of the time. So it passes the routine processing of information about people to the unconscious, to the big ping pong ball. It's got massive resources. It can do that in a blink of an eye, but it uses that process of intuition, that social categorization, where it slides people into pigeonholes. But so far, so good. I can now get through my life. I can make all of the routine decisions I need to make about people in the blink of an eye, and release the resources of the little ping pong ball of the conscious for doing problem solving, decision making, all the heavy lifting of the day job. But here's the problem. As it goes through that process of putting you into pigeonholes, categorizing you, it adds value. It likes blue shirts, it doesn't like white shirts. It likes some skin tones, it doesn't like other skin tones. It likes cufflinks, it doesn't like buttons. It likes trainer shoes, it doesn't like leather shoes. All of the time it's going through that process of both sorting you, but also weighing and valuing you. And that is the problem of unconscious bias. Okay, so that's the first key fact of unconscious bias then, is we maintain and develop these unconscious biases from the patterns, from the experiences to which we've been exposed in the world. But there are two more sources. The first one is the media. What do we see on Facebook? What do we see on the sides of buses? What do we see in the TV ads? How do you think TV advertisements portray women in those advertisements? You probably see them cooking, cleaning, ironing. We call that the Gender Career Association. It's the association between woman and home, cooking, cleaning, ironing, childcare, and man and career, so work, salary, progression, promotion, and words like that. We don't have to actively engage with that media for it to have an effect on us. We might think that we're sitting watching TV programs. Our unconscious is wiring those neural pathways for us all of the time. And the final feature then is culture. Who are the people that you love, care for and respect? And what do they say about groups in society? What do they say about asylum seekers? What do they say about people with disabilities? What are the messages that you get from the ether, from society, about who the valued and who the less valued groups are in society? You may have undergone bias testing. These tests were developed at Harvard in 1998. They're called implicit association tests, and the way they work is really, really simple. They're online computer-based tests, and they throw words and pictures at you in rapid succession, and all you have to do is to sort them to a rule. So let's take the gender test. Male and female pictures appear randomly on screen. You simply have to sort them, and the rule is this. If it's a male picture, hit the right key. If it's a female picture, hit the left key. It then stops and it starts to add words between the pictures. They're good words: talented, competent, able, important, intelligent, or bad words: useless, incompetent, stupid. And all you have to do is sort them according to a rule. And the rule's still simple. It says if it's a good word, hit the left key, sort them with the women. If it's a bad word, hit the right key and sort them with the men. So you're presented with picture and word in a random order, and all you have to do is sort. Halfway through the test, it stops and it reverses the sorting rule. Now it wants you to sort the good words with the men and the bad words with the women. And all this test does is it compares the two halves of that test. It's looking for where you slow down, where you speed up, and where you make mistakes. Because if you have those super fast connections in your head between particular good or bad ideas and one of those two groups, it interferes with your ability to sort. Your little ping pong ball, your conscious, says follow the rules and put it over there. The big ping pong ball, the unconscious, is stronger and faster and wants you to sort it in a different way. And while your conscious brain is overcoming that, it slows you down. In some cases it speeds you up, but it can cause you to make mistakes. These tests have an algorithm that runs in the background that says, in the case of the test we use, how well does that profile of slow and fast and mistakes that they make predict the likelihood that they will let this affect their behaviour. Of all the people we've ever tested, and we've tested about 40,000 people worldwide now, only one person, her name is Maisie, and she lives in Edinburgh, has ever come back with a full set of low scores on those tests. Maisie managed 13 consecutive low scores. Age, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, height, weight, nationality. Test after test after test came back to say that although she leaned one way slightly or the other way slightly in favour of one of the groups, she did not lean so far as to impinge on her behaviour and her decision making. Maisie is unique. Everybody else who's taken more than 5 or 6 of those tests has always come back with a peak or a trough in the data, suggesting that they have those super fast connections that impinge on their behaviour. So, unless your name is Maisie and you live in Edinburgh, it's probably you. It's definitely me. And Emily Pronin and her research team tell us that we have a bias blind spot. I can see your biases, you can see my biases, but we really struggle to see our own biases. Finally, a word of warning. Dogood and Thomas Hunt in 2015 said this. Now that I've told you that these processes are natural, they're wired into those reptilian processes of our brain, that we need them to actually make sense of the world, and that they are everywhere, everybody has them, there is a risk. A risk that you say, that's a relief. Why are we bothered about these implicit biases? And I guess the reason for it is quite simple, is we make decisions. We make decisions about who we work with, who we don't work with, who we help, who we support. I work quite a bit with the police, so who we shoot, who we don't shoot, who we stop search, who we don't stop search, who we arrest, who we don't arrest. They are critical decisions around who we promote, who we recruit, who we give the best performance ratings to, who gets the bonuses, who gets the business. We need to have personal responsibility for reining them in at certain times. The final thing to say about these biases is this. They are easily triggered under particular conditions. So, I place you under cognitive load. I make you busy. I rush you for a decision. I give you complex, multi-layered information to use to make a decision. Does that sound like the day job? In most places, that is exactly the environment that we create under which people will have to make decisions. And finally, emotional load. I make you rushed, stressed, anxious, angry, frustrated, and we then fall back onto those wired neural pathways for making the routine decisions that we have to make about people. One final thing, by the way, is we don't make great decisions when we are depleted of glucose and we've missed lunch, we're tired, we're hungry. At least 3 studies now have shown that depleting the glucose in the frontal lobes leads us to fall back onto our big ping pong ball and our unconscious for making our routine decisions. So the answer is, if you've got a complex, difficult decision to make it when you've recently eaten, when you're not tired, and when you've not been subjected to stresses and strains and emotional load of the day, if you can. Professor Trish Devine says there are no bad people, just bad thinking habits. She says unconscious bias is a thinking habit we've learned and which we can unlearn. Trish's research shows that an hour of unconscious bias training, coupled with bias testing, and giving people some ideas of what they can do, as appears in our top 10 list of things we can do about our unconscious biases, has an effect. Trish gave people that bias training and testing, she gave them some strategies, and she sent them back out into the real world. She brought them back 4 weeks and 8 weeks later, and she retested them. What she saw over the period of those 2 months was a downward fall in their unconscious bias scores. It is not fixed in stone. It can actually be changed if we have the right strategies and apply a little bit of effort. The final thing I would say to you is this. This is not your day job. You have an important and probably very difficult day job to be getting on with. Unconscious bias is something that occurs in specific contexts with particular groups on certain occasions. If we know what our biases are, have the strategies to combat them, and get the little ping pong ball out just once in a while, we can have a really positive effect on our unconscious biases. That concludes our video on the underpinning theory of unconscious bias. If you'd like to learn about our new top tips, our new debiasing tools, bias testing, or any of the other services I provide, please give me a call, 01909 733 810. Email me, pete@shirepro.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter @FatWhiteBloke, or visit our website www.shirepro.co.uk, where a number of other free tools are available. Thank you for your time.